Three, two, one, roll the footage. Welcome back, everybody. Today we hang out with the New York Times best-selling author of How Soon Is Now and When Plants Dream. He hangs out with Joe Rogan, Stephen Colbert, and today with us as we explore how we can speak the truth, what consciousness is, why consciousness does not end after life, and how we can avoid extinction as a species. Welcome, everybody. Daniel Pinchbeck. Daniel, what are you currently creating?
What am I currently creating? Well, I'm doing some online courses. I've been teaching some writing classes online and other seminars. Right now, I'm just started a seminar called Crossing the Threshold, Consciousness Beyond Physical Death, or Realms of Consciousness Beyond Physical Death. So we're looking at the question of, kind of like, is there an afterlife? Can we understand that scientifically? Can we integrate science and mysticism or science and esoteric thought? I'm finding it super exciting. And the genesis of it was a long essay I wrote for a competition put on by the Bigelow Institute on the topic of what's the best evidence for the existence of personality or consciousness after death.
Let's define what is consciousness.
That's a tough one. I mean, you could say awareness of awareness. I would say that's the definition that I usually personally kind of like. Something is conscious when it's aware of its own awareness.
Whenever you ask a cognitive psychologist, they will say, oh yeah, how many semesters do I have to answer the question? But you go straight to the thing. It's awareness of awareness. It's the one thing that observes right now. Right?
It's self-observing. It observes itself observing.
And how did your passion for consciousness start?
Well, I mean, I've always been interested in, I've always been a writer and I had an existential emergency in my 20s where I realized that I was, everybody I knew was part of the sort of scientific materialist or reductive physicalist worldview that said that consciousness could only be based in the brain, and therefore that death would be the annihilation of any form of being or experiencing. And I realized that this was leading to a very nihilistic world where everybody just fights for their own material satisfactions and sort of competes with everybody else. And I began to get really depressed. But then I asked myself, did I actually know that this was the reality? And I was like, well, no, it's just something that, I've been taught by my teachers, what my parents believe, what my friends believe, because their parents and teachers believe it. So how would I actually inquire into it? So that led me to psychedelics and shamanism. I ended up going to Africa, going through tribal initiation in Gabon with the Bwiti tribe, taking a substance called iboga, spent time in the Amazon with ayahuasca, and visited other indigenous communities in Brazil and Mexico and so on. And the more I explored, the more I discovered that there were these many dimensions of consciousness, and consciousness became something that just began to fascinate me more and more. What are the boundaries of it? How do we evolve it? Does it evolve? Does it change over time? Are there other dimensions of consciousness, other forms of being that exist in these other dimensions that we can communicate with? So it's become a lifetime passion.
Did you find boundaries?
No, I don't think we know the boundaries yet. I mean, particularly, there are certain experiences that become more and more popular, maybe partially because of my first book, Breaking Open the Head, and then, DMT, the spirit molecule, the film, and other researchers. But so, for instance, dimethyltryptamine or DMT, which is a brain chemical, there's two types of it, NN and 5-MeO-DMT. Reliably, when you smoke it, produce completely immersive out-of-body experiences where you find yourself immersed in a hyperdimensional alternative reality. And it's almost like more than you can take in. So I think we're just at the beginnings of, learning how to explore these sort of hyperdimensions of consciousness and reality. So I don't think we can know what the boundaries or the limits are at this point.
Would you say that the fabric of existence is consciousness?
Yes.
And one thing
I think quantum physics has actually really backed that up at this point. I mean, even like the greatest physicists of the 20th century ended up saying that, the universe is actually created by the conscious participant, and participation is the basic reality of the universe.
And why does consciousness create material and physical phenomena?
Absolutely. Good question. Well, the thing is that existing in itself, in the sort of transcendent potentiality, it can't have a knowledge or experience of itself. So it's only by creating a separate, individuated, kind of containers, of consciousness, the consciousness can then experience itself, reflect upon itself, learn, grow, explore its creative potential. So in fact, we're actually necessary for there, to be any, experience whatsoever,
One thing that you explore in your body of work is we are in an initiation phase. We are called now to step up as consciousness, as conscious beings, because this way leads to nowhere. Um, can you unpack specifically that book?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I've reflected on that in many of my books. I mean, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, looked at it from the prophetic traditions of different cultures, including the Mesoamerican cultures, but also the Judeo-Christian apocalypse tradition and the, kind of Indian idea of the Yuga cycles and so on. But yeah, essentially, we're in an initiatory crisis for humanity. We've kind of self-willed a situation where we've pushed beyond the limits of the biosphere. We're exploiting, we're destroying. We've caused a mass extinction crisis, accelerated climate change, and it could be that we go extinct. I mean, certainly we know that 99% of species, point 0.89998, who knows, have gone extinct. But it could also be that this is an opportunity for us to reach a different level of consciousness and transform our behavior and actually turn ourselves from kind of like a parasite that the earth is about to wipe away to something like the earth's like active immune system. So I think we're in a very challenging time, and it's hard for us because we get locked into ideologies and beliefs, like even this idea of capitalism, or materialism, and then those kind of operate us. So that's why I think it's so important to kind of step back and kind of understand, reflect upon the processes in which we're enmeshed, and reflect upon these ideologies that we take as fact or as real.
What would happen as a society if we connect more to this everlasting consciousness and we realize that everybody is consciousness, so there is no separation between us, between anybody?
Yeah, very great question. I mean, I feel it could lead to a kind of, spiritual, ecological, political revolution for humanity. I mean, we would become, caring, compassionate, cooperative. We would recognize that, kind of like this separation and alienation that we're experiencing is a result of certain evolutionary and historical processes, and that but we have the creative capacity to transform ourselves and rethink how we're using our tools, our business tools, our technology tools, and our economic tools. These could all be rethought and in a sense redesigned and reinvented for a more cooperative, sort of symbiotic world design, like a next stage of civilization.
I'm curious how you navigate that, because I find myself getting it here cognitively, and then in the same day, I just forget it. I don't embody it. I just forget it. I'm back into doing stuff, and
Sure.
I feel separate again. And I lost the touch with abundance, with the collective intelligence of the universe that is here. So I'm curious, how do you do it, and how do you see people around it stay connected to this?
Yeah, that's complicated. I mean, it's everybody has their own internal psychological and maybe karmic process that they have to go through. I mean, I've definitely gone through times when there were shadow elements of my psychology that I thought I'd dealt with in some sense, but they came charging forward. So yeah, we all have our individual process of development, and Yeah, and the society is like a vast forgetting machine, right? Because you're when you go into business or entrepreneurship, you're immediately back in the mindset of, oh, I have to, like, get this profit and loss. I got a great financial profit. I have to satisfy my investors. I have to compete against my competitors and make something that's better than them and more efficient and so on. So yeah, so it's very easy to lose it. I mean, I guess I'm kind of lucky, or at least I've created my own luck in that as a writer and thinker, I give myself a lot of time and energy to devote to these matters, and I keep coming back to them and rereading and rethinking and re-reflecting, and so I think over time they slowly begin to kind of get absorbed maybe more into my like cellular makeup or something. But it's still a process, and I still make mistakes.
Have you seen entrepreneurs who can navigate this paradox well? Like, yes, they are creating and they are disrupting, but they manage to do it from a place of connectedness, of awareness, over most of their time.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, when I step back, the problem for me is that it's clear that whatever we're doing up to this point is not working. All fields, including philanthropy and charity. I mean, it's great that people raise money for right now Afghan refugees, or but we're dealing with a world like in fragments, and for me we need to somehow get to the systemic underpinnings of the situation, or we can't really affect very much. So for instance, a big problem is that publicly traded companies, their prime directive is to maximize shareholder value, and which means creating financial profit. So they're kind of forced to operate like kind of like robots in a way that just do that. So in a corporation, it's going to self-select for character types who maybe are a little bit more psychopathic or sociopathic, who are not going to see protecting like local ecosystems, local communities as the priority. So it's wired into the logic of our economic system to kind of extract value, exploit resources and so on. So in a way, if we're ever going to deal with this, it's almost like we need a transformation, like a redesign of our economic systems and structures. Now that could happen, potentially through something like blockchain. We could redesign our instruments for exchanging value so that things that are now externalities are internalized. But the problem with doing that is that we'd have to create a more balanced value system where people couldn't accumulate as much wealth. And based on the value system of capitalism, we see people like Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates as these kind of ultimate paragons of genius, and in a way we almost give them like almost like a religious sanctification, and actually I don't think that humanity can survive with such great disparities of wealth. And then when you look at how a lot of these people make this type of wealth, it has to do with we call that privatizing the commons, like figuring out some way to take what could be. I mean, we look at the internet, which was once to be a kind of paradise of free information and free communication, and now it's all about creating these like prison walls and boundaries. You have to pay X amount for any piece of information, or to watch something that interests you, and so on. And sadly, it's created it's re-hierarchized knowledge rather than liberating it.
This week, El Salvador is embracing Bitcoin as a legal tender. Other countries are discussing it. How do you see the the potential and the impact of blockchain technologies for society?
Well, I don't think that Bitcoin is the answer. I mean, I think that the focus on Bitcoin to me is a little bit ludicrous. I mean, first of all, it's a gigantic, disaster in terms of energy use. I mean, you can look up, Bitcoin server farms on Google, and you look at these gigantic, they're using as much energy as a country to do these mathematical equations to produce these 20 million Bitcoins through these algorithms. And and this whole argument that people in the blockchain world make that oh, the dollar doesn't have any intrinsic value, national currencies don't have any intrinsic value, so Bitcoin is just as good as any of that. To me, that's totally a fraudulent argument. I mean, whatever you want to say about a national currency like the dollar, it is backed by schools, highways, military, like all this infrastructure, you know, legal codes. I mean, everything that has been, built and sanctioned by this
That's the
culture.
problem.
you know well, yes and no, but the thing is that Bitcoin is simply backed by the belief of everybody, the accept. I mean, you could make Simon Bitcoin, I can make Daniel Bitcoin, and we can take Bitcoin, the whole thing is open source, and we can make our own, and people have forked Bitcoin. There's no reason that this exact Bitcoin should be taken as value, except that we put our trust and our belief in it, which is fascinating. But I understand also that it's very unstable, because what if that belief wobbles, or dissipates, then suddenly you're holding something that's literally valueless. So but what interests for me is more that now we have the capacity to kind of program systems of value, systems of exchange. Could you program one that was generally accepted, that didn't allow for all these externalities? Because at the moment, like, a corporation doesn't have to pay to pollute or to extract. I mean, it would make everything far more expensive. Unfortunately, we'd have to agree, which we know that if we're going to survive the ecological catastrophe, we would all have to kind of agree to live in a much more moderate way for a number of decades at least, until new systems were put in place. But that's not even a discussion you can have publicly at this point, or very rarely.
You are launching something exciting. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing a series of courses. I have a website, theliminal.institute.com, and right now people can sign up for the course that we're currently doing, which is about consciousness after death, and looking at it from all these different ways. I mean, we're sort of part of the argument of the course is that the reductive materialist or physicalist worldview of science of the last centuries is actually kind of very obsolete and outmoded, and so we can begin to move, kind of securely into a different understanding of the nature of reality that in a way prioritizes consciousness, or sees consciousness as the foundational, kind of, structure of reality. And then we can see, things like string theory, these like other dimensions that physicists have uncovered, as perhaps telling us that there's many dimensions of consciousness or conscious experience. And this begins to allow us to construct kind of a new scientific paradigm that would allow for things like reincarnation, out of body experience. And we actually have tremendous evidence for all these areas, like Ian Stevenson from University of Virginia, who's been looking at young children who spontaneously recall their past lives and early childhood, and he would actually bring the children back to the way they said they were from, and find the families and find birthmarks that represented where they died, whether it was like a shotgun wound or a wound to the neck or something. They would have birthmarks there. So yeah, quite a lot of really compelling research, and from a number of different areas, that really suggests that some type of afterlife and reincarnation, are legitimate. I think once again, that's a necessary aspect of this learning that would allow us to kind of begin to surrender, and detach from this, like, materialism, which has gripped, modern civilization, which is leading to our downfall.
It's funny that you say that. From experience, consciousness and the infinite uh, nature of it is absolutely clear to me, to everybody. Like, if you feel yourself in awareness, you see that this awareness was always here, is always here. It's here when we sleep. When my first kid came to the world, and I looked him in the eyes, my experience was, in this moment we have been 1,000 times. This
Yeah.
is an eternal moment. And it was very clear. It's also clear to you, you resonate with that. But from outside experience, so how can you say you come from a scientific exploration? What outside of experience can you explore? Which material do you investigate?
Well, I'm very intrigued by kind of. I mean, there's increasing numbers of scientists in different fields who are kind of working their way back to a position which is very similar to Eastern mysticism and its understanding of the subtle bodies and kind of the universal consciousness and so on. I mean, one of my favorites is Amit Goswami, who has a book called Physics of the Soul, where he looks at how all the properties of quantum mechanics, like non-locality, spooky action at a distance, and so on, could help us understand how, as we live, we create these kind of, aggregates of like thinking and feeling, which are electrical patterns in the brain of electrons and so on. And that, we know that electrons remain connected, even if they spread out as probability waves almost to infinity, they still are connected on a transcendent domain. So these aggregates of thinking and feeling that we experience when we live, could easily maintain this connection, and that would be the basis for, kind of science, future science of reincarnation, let's say, stuff like that.
And so it's the first time I say in public that this experience with the birth of my son, that I had this experience of having experienced it like 1,000 times, and you go immediately, yeah, sure. Can you unpack that a little bit for listeners who go, no, I'm not sure. How can he be? Yeah, how can he say yes?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's an archetypal human experience, to realize that you've created, another container of consciousness and another, being that, in a way has a soul potentially. I mean, I think one of the things that's amazing about having a child actually is how quickly you realize that they're not blank slates. Like there is an essence there, and the personality then kind of arises out of that essence. But it's not your personality or your wife's personality, or even a combination thereof. It's its own individual and unique being. And I think that's one of the indicators that something like reincarnation must be true. Because if it was just coming into the world as a blank slate, there wouldn't be that sense of a unique essence. This is like one of the people we're looking at in the course, Frederick Myers, from the late 19th century, wrote a book called The Human Personality and the Survival of Bodily Death. And he looked at a lot of extraordinary aspects of human psychology, like kind of idiot savants who can create, do these vast numerical operations instantaneously, or geniuses, where you have somebody like Mozart who at the age of like 4, can play a symphony, or as soon as he hears one, replay it or something. That these suggest that there are, we have the access to these higher levels of potentiality. For most people, the mind acts as like a reducing valve, but maybe because some people have gone through different, kind of reincarnational cycles, they have more access to these hidden dimensions of consciousness and possibility.
Fascinating. If people want to dig deeper, where can they find you and your course?
Yeah, it's well, the course is thelimiinalinstitute.com, and I'm on all the normal platforms. They can always reach out to me on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. I have a website with, which includes some of my past work, pinchbeck.io, and yeah, that's about it.
And you have a newsletter on Substack, right?
Exactly. Actually, that's a good point. Yes, Substack. If they look up my name and Substack, they'll find my newsletter and they can subscribe. That's a great way to stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for being on the show, sharing your wisdom with us.
Thanks for having me, Simon. Nice chat.
See you soon.
Yeah. Ciao, ciao.